In the previous video, I talked about church hurt, and I used the story of Samuel in the Old Testament to show you some of the ways that being part of the family of God can get really messy or confusing and painful. If we are going to be part of God's family, we're going to be together, and that's going to inevitably create an environment for pain. But then the purpose of that pain is growth and maturity and strengthening in our faith. In this video, however, I want to transition into the topic of spiritual or religious abuse. I think that there's a lot of this going on. It's not something that only happens in churches either. This can happen anywhere where there is a power dynamic in which the person in power sort of represents or stands for or speaks for God. And so the people that are under this person come to understand or believe that if they question or disagree with this leader, they are disagreeing with God. And so there's a lot of that going on right now. And I just want to unpack some of it and explore it. But again, I'm going to keep saying this. I do not want this to conflate with the normal, expected, inevitable issue of church pain, family pain, and what will happen to us when we join together. Okay, so there's a difference between being hurt and being abused. And you really have to be mature enough to know the difference. Not all pain is necessarily the result of abuse. So there are three main elements that I've identified as being elements of true abuse. First of all, when there is abuse taking place, what you have is power being used to control through fear. Another element of abuse is that you have conditional as opposed to unconditional inclusion and favor, which then is part of how the power gets used to control through fear, because the fear is, I'm going to get excluded. And then the third element is the fusion of benefits with cost. So, what's supposed to happen in a family or any other organic sort of human community that God has created is that benefits are freely given and freely accessed and enjoyed by every member in order that every member would be healthier, stronger. The fusion of benefits with cost is not a good thing. It puts the weaker into a position where they have to come up with things they don't have in order to continue to benefit from whatever the resources are that they need in that group. None of this is a good environment for grace to thrive. This is diametrically opposed to the reason why God has established his church in the world. And yet it's all too common. It's almost hard to define some of these things because we are all so used to them being a part of even places like youth group. There's these unspoken sort of like power dynamics that take place in the church that people feel. Gen Z is largely a generation that has experienced already a tremendous amount of abuse. And when those same dynamics are being felt in the people of God, in the church of God, where God is supposed to be a God of grace, I think the buzzer's going off pretty heavily in Gen Z right now when those things are happening. And so that's probably why I'm having a lot of conversations. Gen Z does not have more capacity for more abuse. And so I think if we're going to keep Gen Z in the church, we need to rid ourselves of this sort of thing. So how does this kind of religious spiritual abuse weasel its way into a family that is based on grace and good news and a shepherd who has laid down his life for his sheep? Religious abuse is, from what I can tell, caused by a demonic spirit that partners with human leadership. Now, why would a human leader partner with a demonic spirit? And first, let me say, too, I don't know that I believe every single leader that partners with this demonic spirit knows they're doing this. What kind of human leader is this demonic spirit looking for? Well, I think that it's looking for a leader with a need for power or a felt need for power. And that might sound strange to you. It's like, why would a leader need power? Leaders have power. Well, that's not so. Leadership actually highlights your greatest weaknesses. If you've ever been in leadership, you know how leadership puts so much pressure on your failings, your lackings, and just the question, do I have what it takes? So leaders are actually incredibly susceptible and vulnerable to this temptation for power. We even see it as the devil approached Jesus in the desert, and what he offered him was power. If you are the Son of God, claim your power. And so the devil likes to find us in our weakness, especially when we are seated in a position of leadership, because that's intimidating. And he likes to find us in that moment and offer us the power that we think we need. And so, what would cause a human to feel this need for power? Well, a sense of weakness, right? Which could look like fear, inferiority, like comparing your own leadership with that of another leader, or insecurity, not feeling like you have what it takes. Um, Another thing is a sense of how precarious your position is. Like if you feel like it would be easy for you to get demoted or to lose your position. These are all things that leaders really feel, like some of them on a daily basis. And so when this sort of thing is stirring in the heart of a leader, it makes him or her very, very vulnerable to this demonic spirit that comes alongside and says, hey, it sounds like you need more power. This is where the abuse begins. A common side effect of weakness in leadership is jealousy. Leaders that are partnering with this spirit are, whether they know it or not, are often jealous. Another thing that commonly happens is that the leader will masquerade behind flattery and favors. And so this leader might be particularly fond of either flattering or receiving flattery, or favoring or receiving favors. These are the things that the leader is going to grasp for in order to maintain the position of power that they're in. Since we've already been looking in the book of First Samuel for some examples of leadership, we're going to continue that, and we're going to see all of what I've just described in the person of Saul. This is sort of the kind of person that we all are deep inside. And so it's really important for us to identify with this phenomenon that leads to spiritual abuse, because actually we are all closer than we might realize or like to think we are to enacting some of these abusive traits. We are all prone to insecurity, a sense of inferiority, a fear of losing like the respect and the place of honor and leadership and privilege that we have. And so when you are placed in leadership, you just need to assume, sort of as a matter of course, I need to be on to this. I need to be aware that the enemy is probably going to approach me with flattery and with favors and with an offer of power that I can't refuse. And it's going to happen subtly. It's going to happen. It's going to sneak up on me. But when we start to feel jealous and insecure, and like our position of leadership is under threat, that's when you know that the enemy is closing in on you. It's actually what all of us are going to do if we haven't learned the form of leadership that Jesus models for us, which is far more difficult and really requires so much faith in God. And actually, when we endure church hurt, when we are able to stick with the family of God the way that Samuel did, in humility and a willingness to suffer and a willingness to put ourselves aside and a self-sacrificing willingness to just be poured out for the sake of others, and above all, a devotion to stay with God no matter what happens to us, no matter how bad we're suffering, those are all actually the things that are going to fortify us and strengthen us and help us to resist the enemy's offer of power. Saul is actually not an evil man who is trying to do the wrong thing or abuse someone. His biggest issue is that he doesn't understand that God actually knows what to do with our weakness. That often sets up a leader to partner with this kind of abusive power that leads to so much pain. So let's look at Saul in 1 Samuel 9. It says, now the day before Saul came, the Lord had revealed this to Samuel. About this time tomorrow, I will send you a man from the land of Benjamin. Anoint him ruler over my people Israel. He will deliver them from the hand of the Philistines. I have looked on my people, for their cry has reached me. When Samuel caught sight of Saul, the Lord said to him, this is the man I spoke to you about. He will govern my people. Saul and Samuel have this little dialogue, and Samuel reveals why he's there. And Saul's answer is, but I am not a Benjamin, but am I not a Benjaminite from the smallest tribe of Israel? And is not my clan the least of all the clans of the tribe of Benjamin? Why do you say such a thing to me? Here we see Saul with, frankly, a really beautiful, humble spirit. And he is understanding and recognizing and confessing he doesn't really have that much significance, that the Lord would choose him and anoint him as king. We see this same mentality continuing in the next chapter as Samuel is anointing Saul in front of everybody in the kingdom. When Saul had all Israel come forward by tribes, the tribe of Benjamin was taken by lot. Then he brought forward the tribe of Benjamin, clan by clan, and Matri's clan was taken. Finally, Saul, son of Kish, was taken. But when they looked for him, he was not to be found. So they inquired further of the Lord, "Has the man come here yet?" And the Lord said, "Yes, he has hidden himself among the supplies." Now, we cannot read evil into this. At this point in the story, Saul is just small, weak, and humble, and he knows it. It's not toxic to know that you're small and to feel it, and to feel even intimidated by what it is that God is asking you to do. And we need to understand that the leaders who abuse power like this all start with, to some degree, with this sort of realization that they are weak and small. And that's actually what makes them vulnerable to the enemy. So what happens when there's a felt weakness is often we try to take matters into our own hands, and that is what Saul did. So in chapter 14 of 1 Samuel, it says, "All the days of Saul there was bitter war with the Philistines, and whenever Saul saw a mighty or brave man, he took him into his service," or the ESV says he attached him to himself. This is where we see Saul's sense of weakness turning from humility to pride, and turning from dependence on God into this sort of partnership with evil, where he feels that in order to continue in the calling that God has over him, he's going to need to latch onto or attach himself to some form of power that's outside of himself. And this is where leaders go wrong. So in 1 Samuel 15, it says that Samuel said to Saul, "I am the one the Lord sent to anoint you king over his people Israel. So listen now to the message from the Lord. This is what the Lord Almighty says. I will punish the Amalekites for what they did to Israel when they waylaid them as they came up from Egypt. Now go, attack the Amalekites and totally destroy all that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys." The point here is that Saul just couldn't bear to part with any kind of power, including the power of the enemy, in this case, King Agag. And so in verse 9, it says, "But Saul and the army spared Agag and the best of the sheep and the cattle, the fat calves and lambs, everything that was good. They were unwilling to destroy completely, but everything that was despised and weak, they totally destroyed." And this, I believe, is where we see the partnership starting. This happens in leadership all the time, where a leader is feeling insecure, weak, feeling like the underdog, feeling like they're going to fail God, which gives the enemy permission to start slowly moving in on their ministry and on their way of doing things. And eventually we get this climate and environment of abuse in which the weak are despised and destroyed, and the strong are kept and cultivated. The text actually tells us that there was an evil spirit that began to partner with Saul. 1 Samuel 16 says, "Now the spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and a harmful spirit from the Lord tormented him. And Saul's servant said to him, 'Behold, now a harmful spirit from God is tormenting you.'" And so Saul is starting to feel this agitated restlessness. And it's the anxiety of what happens to leaders when they feel their weakness, but really don't understand that God has a place for their weakness. What ends up happening is the story of David and Goliath. And David has this opportunity just to show his faith in God. And long story short, Saul starts to get jealous. Remember, that's one of the qualities that happens in an abusive leader as they begin to panic about losing their position and their power. And so Saul says, "They have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed thousands, and what more can he have but the kingdom?" And Saul eyed David from that day on. The next day, a harmful spirit from God rushed upon Saul, and he raved within his house while David was playing the lyre as he did day by day. Saul had his spear in his hand, and Saul hurled the spear, for he thought, I will pin David to the wall. But David evaded him twice. Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul. And Saul totally loses it. He's already lost the kingdom. He knows God is already angry with him for not being dependent on God, but now he's about to really lose his mind. And so this is where leadership can often lose its grip on reality and on even on those that are truly meant to be allies and friends. And so this is the steady and inevitable decline of an abusive leader that is partnering with an evil spirit. We start out with a sense of weakness, and then God anoints us in that weakness, and we can't believe it, and we don't understand what's happening. And then we fail to go to him with our weakness and trust him with it. And so as our job gets more and more complicated and we're bearing more and more weight, we begin to take matters into our own hands. And pretty soon we are feeling threatened and jealous. We're doing things our own way. We're sensing that God is no longer with us, and we begin to turn on the very people that are there to help us. And that's how abuse begins. The truth is, this can rise up in any of us. And if we're not careful, it will. Because the Christian church is losing its power in our culture. We're losing political power. We will lose economic power. And Jesus says we are to expect this. But if we don't understand that, and if we don't understand that God has an important place for weakness in his plan and in his redemptive agenda, we're going to freak out like Saul did. We're going to take matters into our own hands, and we ourselves are going to become abusers. And I want us to see that we all have the potential to be just like Saul. In fact, I think we will all be just like Saul if Jesus doesn't come and teach us a different way.